Today on the Learn It, Use It podcast.
The candidate is asked behavioral-based interview questions on those leadership principles. That has zero to do with functional skills.
That's great.
Yeah, and I'll just give you a couple examples of, but there are some leadership principles that they look for, which is, one might be frugality. One might be hire and develop the best talent. One might be moving quick. And so those are the types of leadership principles and interpersonal skills that they're looking for to really assess someone's cultural fit, not necessarily the functional skills, because they already checked the box on the functional skills. This is really to assess their cultural integration with the team.
This podcast is by the Operations Management and Engineering Management programs in the College of Engineering at the University of Arkansas. In our programs, we stand by learn it today, use it tomorrow. The instructors for our courses are professionals with real-world experience where you will be able to immediately apply what you have learned. Today's workforce is changing rapidly and all fields require adapting to new environments, which means you need new credentials quickly to improve your current performance. Our graduate programs and certificates apply to all industries so you can be competitive in today's workforce. Travis currently works for Amazon Web Services, helping Amazon's customers with their digital transformation to cloud computing. Prior to joining AWS, Travis was a manager at Deloitte Consulting in their organizational transformation practice. Travis also spent 10 years internally with Walmart in their change management practice, organizational design, team effectiveness, training, and communications. Prior to joining Walmart in 2011, Travis spent 8 years with the Continuous Learning Group as a senior consultant. Clients Travis has consulted with include ExxonMobil, Johnson & Johnson, Kroger, Eli Lilly, J.B. Hunt, PPG, CN Rail, Honda, Chevron, and Cigna, just to name a few. Travis earned his bachelor's in psychology at Utah State University, where he also earned a minor in human resources management. Travis then earned a master's degree in psychology from the University of Nevada, Reno. At that time, he also worked as a human resources generalist for the Tahoe Pacific Hospital and Health South Rehabilitation Hospital. Travis lives in Bentonville, Arkansas, and has come to take advantage of all the outdoor activities Northwest Arkansas has to offer: mountain biking, hiking, and boating, just to name a few. He and his wife have been married over 25 years and have 4 daughters ages 20, 17, 15, and 13. Jim Burgin has taught with MSOM since 2010 and currently teaches quality management, organizing for change, and maintenance management. Jim is a retired United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel with the University of Arkansas Bachelor's of Science in Industrial Engineering and an MBA. Jim honed his leadership and teaching during his 22-year Air Force career through diverse assignments, from flying fighter jets in Europe to commanding the Arctic Survival School in Fairbanks, Alaska. Since completing his military career, he has worked as a quality manager in manufacturing and as the Director of Maintenance Management for Tyson Foods. Jim has certifications in lean manufacturing, Six Sigma, and leadership. Since retirement, Jim has volunteered as a board member of Arkansas Academy of Industrial Engineers, a service organization that provides over $125,000 in scholarships annually to industrial engineering students. Welcome, gentlemen.
Fantastic. And we'll monitor the questions throughout the podcast. If there are questions that come up, feel free to put them in the chat, and Jim and I will take them as they come. So before we get started, let me just set some context here. So both Jim and I have taught what's called the Organizing for Change course at the University of Arkansas in the MSOM program for close to 7 years now is how long that believe that course has been in play. And it's turned out to be one of the more popular elective courses at the university or in the MSOM program. And I would say regularly our courses have between 20, 25. I think the most that I've had is around 33 at one point.
Wow.
So it's and oftentimes we'll run multiple tracks at the same time, multiple sections in the same term. And part of the reasons that we figured out the students choose this class is just because of the practical nature of it. Students bring a project from their work or a volunteer organization, a church, a sports team, or military is what we find quite often. And it's something that they can then take with them. And so each week, and how it's structured is each week, each of the students is given a topic that adds to their overall plan. And they can be things like articulating change impacts, identifying who their stakeholders are, developing a communication plan, sometimes a training plan or a sustainment plan. And then it culminates with a final project where each of the students will develop a robust change management plan that runs alongside their project management plan. But instead of looking at the technology or the processes that are part of a typical project management plan, this is really addressing the people side of it, which sometimes a lot of people forget. And one of the things that Jim and I have, as we have taught this course, that we've, just by nature of us teaching the course, we hear some of the challenges that the students face every single week. And that gives Jim and I the chance to give them advice on what they're hearing, what they're seeing, and give them some thoughts on what we might do in their situation based on Jim's and ours experiences and how they can overcome those challenges. So Jim and I, over the summer, we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could take some of what these students have, shared with us and talk about some of these issues that we hear from their own experiences, and even some from our own. So, and a couple of things that Jim and I talked about earlier in the summer were, the importance of managers in the middle when it comes to leading change. We thought, what, there's a segment there in organization that is sometimes overlooked. And by extension of that, so, when it comes to those managers in the middles, what's more important? Interpersonal skills or functional skills? Because managers do have to have a degree of functional skills, but you can't underestimate the importance of the interpersonal skills either. And so there's that debate. And so, Jim, I'm just going to ask you a question. Let me get you started here, just talking about the interpersonal and functional skills. So let me just play the devil's advocate.
All right.
So, when it comes, are functional skills really less important than interpersonal skills? Because I'll tell you what, Jim, I don't know that I want a doctor who doesn't have the same kind of training. They can have great interpersonal skills, but if they don't know what they're talking about or know how to work on me, I'm a little concerned. So tell me a little bit more about, the importance of interpersonal skills versus functional skills.
Boy, first off, it's just great to be here with Travis and given the opportunity to talk to some people. I actually had some students that threatened me at coming to this, so we'll get started. But I couldn't agree more. If I'm going for heart surgery, the bedside manner is, that's secondary. If he doesn't know what he's doing, I'm looking for expertise and I'm looking for experience in that area. However, I've seen it over the years. The number of people that will have a bad hire because they started off with somebody with great functional skills, and they end up with a bad hire because the person's not friendly. They don't get along with the team. They don't have integrity. So those are some of the things I'm kind of looking for when I talk about hire traits. Look for people honest, integrity, work ethic. If they're trustworthy, professional. Boy, if you're setting up, and we may get a chance to talk about this a little bit later on, but when you start setting up a team that's going to do change, professionalism better be one of the top jobs. So I also look for a self-starter. I look for high standards and then I look for an active learner, because if you're going to hire traits, all those traits that you like and the people that you like being around, and you end up not doing that and get great functional skills, a bad hire is a bad hire regardless of, and people can fool you a little bit, but I think you're going to talk in a little bit about how you make those decisions or what you've seen in some of your interviewing. And then I'm going to talk the more funny stories. We come from a book called, or we started the course with a book called Made to Stick.
Yep.
And one of the chapters says stories.
Yeah.
So I have no great knowledge of anything, but I can tell some great stories that kind of capture that.
Yeah. So before we get too far, Jim, if I can just ask you one question, or maybe get you to elaborate a little bit more. Earlier when we had talked, you had mentioned, you'd said this phrase. It came from Jim Collins' book, The Good to Great. And the phrase that you mentioned, which really kind of resonated with me because I'd heard it before, was that you got to get the right people on the bus. So when you think about those skills that you mentioned earlier, when it comes to putting the right people on the bus, what are some of those, traps that you might say when you don't get the right people on the bus?
Well, and you gain this over years of doing interviewing,
Hmm.
both being interviewed and when you're interviewing somebody else. And I kind of use the example. I'm reading Dr. John White,
Mm.
the ex chancellor, the chancellor emeritus. I'll get in bad shape for not using his name right, but I'm reading his book on leadership, and I'm just finding all kinds of stuff in there. Now you tell me if I'm answering your question, but there was an example of somebody I actually work with in the Arkansas Academy of Industrial Engineers, a lady named Melinda Fauble, and she is interviewing somebody that's made it through the system, through all of the traps to get to kind of that final
Yeah.
interview.
Hmm.
And that person asks to borrow the phone, picks up the phone, calls her boss in front of everybody and says, "Hey, I won't be in this afternoon because I'm sick." Well, I don't know that that's the trait I would be looking for. And in the end, she didn't get, or the person, he or she, I don't
Yeah.
know, did not get the job. But you got to look for those. Oftentimes, they're a lot harder clues to
Yeah.
pick up on.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's another one where I was looking for professionalism
Hmm.
because these were people that were going to go into Tyson plants and represent corporate headquarters. And this guy comes in, young guy,
Yeah.
probably learned something from it,
Hmm.
takes his sunglasses, puts them up on top of his head, and kind of looks a little bit slovenly. "You're not representing me, bud."
Yeah.
And that's just kind of, there are ways to tell, but and we're going to talk about this a
Yeah.
little bit, but you've got to get your HR people to help you um, have those skills and get the younger people, because bad hires are tough on you.
You're absolutely right, Jim. And one other thing that you had talked about when you and I had met earlier was that I wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit more. Because when I think of sometimes there are certain jobs which you really interpersonal skills matter. And might be other jobs where maybe there might be less important. And one of the examples that you shared with me that really caught me like, I want to hear a little bit more about that was you said maintenance mechanics, or can't remember the role, but it was some role in the maintenance department. And I thought, that's a role that to me would be well suited for functional skills. But then you had highlighted there can be some traps if you don't pay attention to the interpersonal skills of maintenance work. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Oh boy. All right. You shouldn't get me started on this, but and this is the old your best technician
Yeah.
is your next leader, your next supervisor. And it just doesn't work like that. And once again, I'll tell you a story.
Hmm.
I'm the new supervisor is probably very skilled,
Yeah.
tremendously skilled at his old job.
Hmm.
And when things hit the fan, he is going to revert back to his old job. And you're sitting there watching this guy work on this
Yeah.
piece of machinery, and then I'm watching some people up above him working on another
Hmm.
part of it. And so I tell the story, and then he's got all his other technicians
Yeah.
standing around watching him.
Yep.
And now you're not getting anything done. So I talked to the plant manager about it, and I said, "Listen, I watched these guys ruin 3 belts because they were trying to get them onto the machine. They
Mhm.
didn't know how to do it." And he perfect question. He goes, "Well, where was the supervisor?" And
Mm.
I said, "He was shoulder deep in that same machine 4 feet below." And so you got to remember that your best technician, and that it's everybody does it
Yeah.
everywhere, is not necessarily your next supervisor. And it goes from your next supervisor or your best supervisor is not
Mhm.
necessarily your next maintenance manager.
Yeah.
So, and that can play across the board.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So if I'm hearing what you're saying, it's, when you're looking for those maintenance technicians, when you select your next leaders, it's 9 times out of 10 going to come from that pool that you have hired into to be those maintenance technicians.
Yes, but it may not be your best
Sure.
one, and that's where things go. Now you keep asking me questions, so I'm gonna this this is unfair.
Yeah.
I'm gonna kick it back
Yeah,
to
please do.
you because you kind of led me into this thing where how do you tell? You both interviewed, you build a team,
Yeah.
and you have also been on some interviews.
Mhm.
So how do people find out that I like you
Yeah.
and good people? We kind
Yeah.
of naturally gravitate toward one another, but how do people tease out that part where they know that you're the guy that
Yep.
has both the functional skills and
Yeah.
the traits that they're looking for?
So, I'll do a quick, plug for some of our HR courses that we teach here. We do go into a little bit greater detail of what that looks like there. But I would say the first thing that people need to do as they're looking to evaluate the talent pool that they're selecting people from, you know, does your HR team have a process with which that can help you? Because oftentimes the functional leaders are the ones who are selecting the talent for the team, not HR. And so HR might do some pre-screening, or your recruiting team might do some pre-screening, which to me checks the box of getting those functional skills done. And as you mentioned, I've participated in interviews, and I've been the one being interviewed a handful of times. And typically one of the first 2 or 3 interviews that you engage in when you're exploring a company and a company is exploring you is to basically check the functional skills box. That's not the bulk of the interview process in most mature organizations. If you have an organization where maybe your recruiting processes aren't as mature, that might be a good thing to raise the flag to your leadership team to say we probably ought to raise the bar when it comes to interviewing and how do we select our people. And I think one of the more common techniques that is being used today is the behavioral interview questions. Now, I'll preface it with this: you're still getting a thin slice of someone's experience through an interview. It's not perfect, so just take that into consideration. So, given that you have a thin slice, what are the right most impactful questions you can ask to be able to assess someone's interpersonal skills? And right now, my current work, I work at Amazon Web Services, and I'll just use that as the example. There's plenty more that we've got, but just because that's where I am now, I'll go there. And so there's a set of 16 leadership principles, which is what they're called. And over the course of a day, sometimes 2 days, the candidate is asked behavioral based interview questions on those leadership principles. That has zero to do with functional skills.
That's great.
Yeah. And I'll just give you a couple examples. I won't go through them on their public knowledge. I'm not disclosing anything that's not publicly available to anyone who's curious to go look. But there are some leadership principles that they look for, which is, one might be frugality. One might be um, hire and develop the best talent. One might be moving quick. And so those are the types of leadership principles and interpersonal skills that they're looking for to really assess someone's cultural fit, not necessarily the functional skills, because they already checked the box on the functional skills. This is really to assess their cultural integration with the team. Jim, you were going to say something.
Oh, well, you talk about frugality, and
Mhm.
it takes me back to I met with they've got a lot more, but when I was with Tyson, they had a north of 100 probably plants, and I'd get out and meet the maintenance managers.
Mhm.
And frugality, if I could find a farmer, somebody that farmed and is doing this, because first off, they've been tinkering
Yeah.
and they've been fixing their own equipment. But if I can find a maintenance manager that's got that kind of knowledge and also the frugality, I didn't have to worry about him spending too much money.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I spent time trying to get him to spend a little bit more money and buy a better motor
Yeah.
or whatever, because he was staying within his budget for that
Yeah.
week. So
Yeah.
I love the frugality side of it. Now, I've interrupted you by writing something down on a piece of paper, so
That's
please
okay.
continue on.
So I'll finish that thought. And basically, where it comes down to how a behavioral based interview question would look, if you don't know, is tell me of a time when you've had to do more with less. That might be an example of a behavioral based interview question that an interview is looking for with frugality. And same thing with the others. It's more of a tell me of the time when. And so the advice that people are given and when you're going through the interview process is come prepared to your interview with examples of where you've demonstrated these specific traits and skills before in previous in your experience. So then that way, as the interviewer or as the hiring manager, you can then have a better, not a perfect, but you can have a better picture of the candidate that's in front of you. And I will say this, your example that you shared earlier about the candidate calling their manager saying, hey, I need to take the day off, I'm sick. That doesn't cover those sorts of instances. There still needs to be a degree of awareness, social awareness of what's happening and paying attention to those little nuances that sometimes can go under the rug.
Well, and that one gets back to judgment. You
Yeah.
can just move them right out of the choice area. Now, and I'm asking you questions now,
Sure.
and we'll get back to it here in a minute.
Yeah.
But you talk about the HR folks
Mm-hmm.
taking care of the functional skills.
Yeah.
And I've got my students coming to me all the time saying, I don't have this much experience, but I bring other things to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they're going to find somebody that's got all this experience and all these skills. And I say, go ahead, apply for that job, because they will write for, the Captain America out there, and they'll get to the point where, and I give it back to and it's a long question.
You're
with
fine.
Some comments in the middle, but those people in HR, they are used to a system where they have to look. If they tick off the functional skills, hey, I'm safe here. I did the things that you put on your job description, and we can talk about that later if you want. But these are the things you put on your job description, and I'm weeding them out for you.
Right.
So you may be missing out on some of those people.
Right.
And I'll let you talk for a minute.
So, a couple of, I think we want to address this particularly to students who do find themselves in that scenario where they want to apply for a job. They feel like they've got the capabilities to do that job, but yet maybe they're reluctant. And so, Jim, we talked earlier, is this particular question feels like it's one that the audience should be potential students. Is that right? Or potential applicants?
Could be people out there in the workforce saying, hey, I got to find some good people, because hey, I can't tell whether we are in a drought of people or a tremendous rainfall of people. I watch the economic indicators. I have no idea, but go ahead.
So I think a couple things. First, those applicant tracking systems, and even times that first line of defense, which are the recruiters, I hate to call them line of defense, but the first filter, you might say, that applicants fall through is the first one is the applicant tracking system. That's all automated through artificial intelligence. And so those applicants those ATSs, those applicant tracking systems, their primary function is to filter candidates. So in many cases, you'll have, 100 applicants applying for one job. Well, you can't interview all 100 applicants. It's just not possible. And chances are all 100 of those applicants don't have the skills required. Great. And so that's where the applicant tracking system comes into play, is it filters out, provides that first cut, you might say, of those candidates. Now, for people who are applying for those roles, it does take a little bit of effort on our part that we need to be, rather than just using a standard resume that we would submit to all and any job that we've got, we've got to put in a little bit of effort and tailor our resumes. Again, not knowing that if we believe we have the skills, call out those skills that match most closely what the job posting is. And again, it's not to be dishonest, but it's to simply highlight those areas where you do have those experiences, that where those applicant tracking systems will then send your resume into to the next filter, which then becomes the recruiting people. And the recruiting people will then do another scan and they'll evaluate it. And that's when they'll either pass you on to the next one or not. And so that's why it's important to not have a generic resume, but to really tailor the resume based on the job you're applying for. I find that's where you'll have a greater hit on your resume.
And I'm asking this because I just don't know,
Mm-hmm.
because I spent a lot of time addressing all of the job requirements on a cover letter.
Yeah.
And I did target my resume when I was sending it out.
Mm-hmm.
But is AI even more sophisticated than the thing that just went through and looked for keywords?
They're very similar. They're very similar. So AI really is more of a learning tool, and so the applicant tracking systems, they're automatically going to look for keywords that'll bring one candidate from the applicant to the continue on pile. And what AI is doing is now learning, when you have not just one keyword that matches, but maybe a keyword that's similar to one of the keywords. It'll learn that, okay, these two are related, so we should pass that one through, whereas maybe previously in an earlier version it wouldn't have gone through. And so that's where the AI comes in, is it self-learns based on the volume of applicants that one receives.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And they're really just scanning the resume. They're not looking at cover letters at all, or
No.
are cover letters just out the window now?
Well, that's an interesting point. That is a school of thought that's out there, is that our cover letters really as impactful. And you see things on LinkedIn here and there where I think the growing direction tends to be that cover letters are no longer important. One data point would be my own data point. I don't know the last time I've actually sent out a cover letter.
How about that?
Yeah.
All right. Do you want me to kind of take on? You want me to go forward?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. Well, we talk about HR.
Yeah.
And a quick story is that I developed, and I know that there are a lot of other people, the CEO of Best Buy, John Wooden, the basketball coach, that believe in this higher trades, train skills.
Yeah.
Jack Welch is one of my favorites. I mean, I wasn't sure. Anyway, I loved his business acumen. The other side of it, But anyway, I retired from the Air Force, and it's in my bio, so I'm not on the witness protection program anywhere. But I came back to an area, Fayetteville, Arkansas, that really did not know what to do with a reasonably high-ranking Air Force officer. And so I started putting it on my resume, maybe on my cover letter for sure, that said, hey, I want you to hire traits, train the skills. It wasn't perfect, I can assure you, but actually, I got it through knowing somebody else. But
Yep.
The point is, and the reason I tell that story is when I started working for Tyson, and I want you to go back and we can kind of kick this one back and forth, but how you build your team, your change team out there. But when I got to Tyson, I was led in, and fortunately my resume, I think, went directly to the hiring manager, who understood, and I got hired. And with that, things went very well after that, because I continually say, if you can lead, write well, and speak well, and all evidence to the contrary here, I reckon. But the point is, if you can do those three things, you can probably do pretty well. I think there's a desire to learn in there. Anyway, I got to Tyson Foods, and when I was there, they were not quite as mature a company as they are right now, and they kind of questioned whether this guy was hiring some kind of military guy, and but I go back to my the core values of the Air Force are service for self,
Mm-hmm.
excellent in all things, and integrity first.
Yeah.
And with that, that pretty well covers some of the traits that I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking for out there. But anyway, I was very fortunate because and this is where I should have gone in and helped out HR a
Mm-hmm.
little bit. I was a little bit busy, but anyway,
Mm-hmm.
they kept sending me. They didn't know what to do with these military guys, and so they kept sending me all the military resumes.
Yeah.
And I said, "Cowabunga, this is great. I'm getting
Yeah.
exactly what I want." Now I got some very, very talented other people,
Mm-hmm.
but and when I'll go to it now and then
Sure.
because we might get a but one of the things in the higher traits, trained skills, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, is good people know good people.
Yeah.
I had a Bolivian connection that was unbelievable.
Mm.
I brought in, I think I had 5 Bolivians
Yeah.
that I brought in, and then they brought a Colombian with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I hate to have the Colombian connection because that's probably got a bad feeling to it. But those people knew good people, and they were proud to bring them in,
Yeah.
and they didn't put up with those bad traits
Yeah.
anywhere. And so their friends were going to have very much the same traits that they had.
Mm-hmm.
So, um,
That that's fantastic. And I'll even share one. You had mentioned earlier about when I staff a team, and what triggered that thought to me where my expertise is in organizational change management. That's my stock and trade. That's what I do, training and communications. When I look to staff a team, and when I have staffed a team in the past, very rarely do I ever look for those skills. And the main and the part of the reason why, and there's a couple reasons. One, because I have those skills. That's what I've been doing for 15, 20 years now. And so I don't need someone to be the expert because I can play that role. And if I need outside advice, I have a pretty solid network of connections that I can have be my advisors to say, "Hey, here's what I'm thinking. Am I completely off the rails?" And that's both within companies and outside companies where there's a bunch of us that have been doing this for a while, and so I've got that sounding board. But to your point, Jim, there are some things that are just, I would say, hard to teach. Responsiveness being one. When you give someone a task, them not procrastinating it until the next day, but them jumping on it and getting something back to you quickly. Because I think in our day and age, speed matters. And I don't want to say perfection less, but with the many organizations migrating towards this agile way of thinking, speed matters, perfection less, because we can iterate and improve as we go along. The quicker we can get what they call minimum viable products out is important. And that's, I think, why one of the things that I look for when staffing a team is more on those traits rather than skills, is because those are the things that maybe I'm lacking. There's that responsiveness. Maybe there's a skill that they possess that is something that I need to be very deliberate about, and whereas they just bring that automatically. And so I'll look to someone to augment where they might be strong and I might be not as strong. And so I think that's why it's important to really look for those traits rather than skills exclusively.
that is the wise boss or the wise supervisor or whatever does not have to be the smartest man in the room or woman in the room. And actually, John White in his book, and I just kind of came up with this, it's not on my piece of paper.
Sure,
right here,
sure.
but he talked about bosses
Yeah.
and leaders.
Mm.
And bosses have to be the smartest ones of everybody, and they are in charge, and by golly, their word goes.
Mm-hmm.
And leaders are just exactly like you.
Yeah.
Hey, I can be the dumbest guy in the room if I've hired the smartest people in the room.
Yeah.
And my students might attest to that being the possibility. But and now I'm going to talk a little bit about the course.
Yeah.
And the overall MSOM.
Mm-hmm.
And Karin, I don't know if we've had any questions come in or
good.
not, but these are our customers, so we could probably talk to them a little bit after I finish my soliloquy on agility. The MSOM program, I mean, we talk about learn it today, use it tomorrow. And you bring up agility, and it is amazing. When COVID came around, they said, okay, everybody's got to go online and use Zoom or Teams or something else.
Yep.
And our instructors and our staff and the whole group of people kind of gave out a yawn and said, I got this. and that is because we have developed that agility. I don't know if people know, but I actually have taught people in a classroom and on Zoom in Florida, in Memphis, and another guy where I don't even know where he was, but that was the way the course was set up.
Interesting. Yeah.
And it's not perfect.
Sure.
And we're working continuously improving, trying to make it better. But, and I can tell you that I did a class purely on Zoom, and I made them keep their cameras on, which was, but the agility of it was, hey, I teach by asking a lot of questions, and it was 95% to having them live in the room. I will tell you right now, and you might want to talk about, because you're mainly an online instructor, and kind of talk about some of that too.
Yeah. So back to your point, I think when we originally, when COVID happened, we had been operating this way since I can remember, since I joined the program, back in 2015. And so this was nothing new that we needed to reconfigure how we were delivering our courses, at least up for the asynchronous portion. I will say this: there's the advice that I kept hearing from multiple professors is there's an element about doing a not a face to face as in physically there, but more as a face to face as in let's see who you are, and let's get together, have a structured but unstructured conversation about, and I think what I have learned, and so I implemented that practice earlier about a year ago. I started doing these weekly sessions with the students. That's completely optional. There's no requirement to be there. But when you have 10 of 20 of the students join, clearly there's a need there. And there's some people who want that, interaction with someone else besides just their computer screen and a chat room, for example. And so I think that's one of the benefits of the program, is that you do have a wide range of professors who do those kinds of face-to-face interactions and provide those students those options. Not every student will want to do that, and that's okay. Some students are perfectly fine and can do fine just by themselves in their material, taking their exams, participating on the discussion chats, whatever that might be, and they do well. But there are a handful of students who prefer that interaction, and that's what I think that's where what you'll find in the program is you'll find a lot of professors that do provide that interaction.
Good. Karin, we have anybody that wants to ask us a question, or are they just the angels are weeping and they know we've covered everything they need to know?
I think, Jim, you're just so interesting that you've just captivated our audience here. But what I do want to point out is that, anybody who is a live participant right now, please, we welcome any questions, comments for Jim or Travis right now. Just simply type them in the chat. This is meant to be interactive. And so while you kind of formulate those thoughts, maybe Jim or Travis have any questions maybe that you want to ask our audience that they could answer and interact that way.
So I'll pose a question for the group and also to Jim. When Jim and I were originally putting this idea together, we had a clear distinction: functional skills or interpersonal skills or traits, whatever you want to call that. And I kept thinking, are there things in the middle that don't fit nicely into either one of those buckets that are important? And I came up with one example. I'd be curious to hear if there are other people who have other examples that might not fit nicely into one of those buckets. And so Jim, this goes back to when we were staffing teams. If there's someone who doesn't have that same level of organizational, for me personally, someone that doesn't have that same organizational management pedigree, you might say, and maybe they have a great interpersonal skill set, but I've got to choose between someone who's got, that skill or that trait. There's another one that doesn't fall nicely, and that's organizational understanding. And so, particularly in the field of organizational change management, one of the things that's important is to have a network and a view of the organization, because communicating and training and building stakeholder engagement is important. And so being able to know the organization, know the function within an organization, and who is who within an organization is important. And so oftentimes that is one of those, I would say, traits that doesn't fit nicely into either one of those buckets, but is important, something that we need to look at. And so the question is are there other things that don't fit nicely in either one of those?
Hey, it's a great question.
Yeah.
And I will just kind of take off on that one.
Sure.
Because I had worked for a large organization that took care of national defense, and we kind of thought our vision was pretty good.
Yeah.
But when I moved into a regular corporate hierarchy, it was I had to learn.
Yeah.
And I had to have some of those people that were really smart on my team that could say, hey, let's look in this direction.
Yeah.
Or but here's the point. And I like to think that I have some of those traits, the friendliness and the approachability and all of those things. And as I worked with these other parts of the organization, I developed great contacts that knew they could count on me, and I knew I could count on them. And so, yes, organizational knowledge or experience or whatever is wonderful.
Yeah.
But if you get somebody in there that's got that great organizational knowledge and they're a horse's patoot, you're going to put the wrong.
Yeah.
I think. Okay, wait a minute. We got a question. So
yeah, we've got a couple here. The first one here, guys, is from our own Rich Ham. He's asking if there's cultural consideration when recognizing traits or how to implement change. How about those differences between the generations we've all been talking about recently?
Oh, I got that one if you
Go
want.
for it. We'll let you take that one.
I actually teach a course in maintenance management. And one of the things that we talk about in that course is the intergenerational things. But I had a Walmart guy in my last class, and my last class finished, 3 days ago or something. And he would bring up in class, now this is a live class, and he'd bring up his challenge. And one of his big challenges was intergenerational.
Yeah.
He has baby boomers. He's a Gen X. You got Gen Y or millennials, and now the Gen Zs are coming into the system now. And this is where you've either got to do a bunch of reading and learning and talking to people, or your HR's got to be able to help you out in this area too, because they're the training folks. And Rich and Karin know it. Hey, time off is tremendously important for me, but there are people that want the pat on the back, and that's kind of my generation too. But money's just enough to get me by and buy me some new tools. So your thoughts?
No, I would agree. I think there's one other thing that I have seen in the literature, but also seen just through my own experience, is yes, money is important, but it's almost table stakes. It's what gets people in the door and keeps them in the door. What will really create engagement, which is really what we're looking to do. How do you create engagement with the employees? Is oftentimes this idea of giving them meaningful and challenging assignments. That is one that I think spans, I think, multiple generation, but I think in particular, I think the research is showing is that the baby boomers are highly engaged by that kind of work, and then also the other end. So the Gen Z and Gen Y that's a big motivator for them, is being engaged in meaningful work. And so not just work that you come to do your 8 and hit the gate, but you're engaged in stuff that really challenges you in a way that maybe you hadn't been challenged before. So just to add on to what you've already said.
Yeah, if I can take that.
Yeah.
I beg your pardon. We'll go back to Rich's question because I lost
Yeah.
my train of thought.
Mhm.
That happens with age sometimes.
Yeah.
Now we've also got the ability to network and build relationships and open doors. Yes, this can be considered interpersonal, but someone that can work in teams and connect is mission critical.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can I take that one there?
You
I'll
take
start
that
out with that one, Jim. Troy, I think it's a great question, and it's one that I wrestled with a little bit before we came in here, if I'm honest with you, because I almost thought the same thing that you did. Is like, is that one that is in the middle, or does it fall more in that traits camp? And I think you probably could make a case for it being there in the middle, because there is a degree of organizational agility that you need to have. And specifically when it comes to in the area of leading change, which is where I'll address it to, because being able to understand what those political dynamics are can make you extremely effective in being able to know, when we roll out this program, who might react in a way where we need to give them a little extra care and feeding or hold their hand a little bit more. And so I 100% agree with you. That is important to have. Now, whether we call that a trait or whether we call that in the middle, I don't know. I think we might be getting into splitting hairs, but that's not to say that it's not important. And so having that networking ability, having a broad network, and having that political astuteness, you might say, and being able to know who do we need to worry about? Who do we need to give more attention to? And there are some that you don't need to give as much attention to. They'll just give them what they need to do in terms of speaking points, whatever that might be, and they'll be fine. Jim, what do you think?
Well, this gets back to your black hole.
Yeah,
because
that's a good point.
This was, and to kind of explain it, you've got the people. If you're doing change, and now these things have kind of morphed together a little bit.
They
change
have. And we knew they would.
The higher traits. But the people at the top may have been driving this change, and boy, they'd say, okay, and then they say, hey, Travis, Jim, we're gonna build this team to do these things.
Yeah.
And they kind of skip over that group in the middle. And those, for me, were the ones that needed the most care and feeding, and they were the most important because they were the ones that were going to push the change.
Yeah.
And we did several things in order to make them more knowledgeable about what there were training programs for those folks. And once they got on board, it was sweet.
That's exactly right. Because if those managers in the middle are left out, what I think we often take for granted is at some point the project team is going to pack their bags and leave, and they're going to leave the organization with whatever tool, process, technology that they brought, and they're going to walk away, as they should. A project team is not an infinite team. And so when that happens, who's going to be left to make sure that the processes are followed and that the people are doing what they need to? Well, that's the middle managers. If they hadn't been engaged in the right way before you roll out or before you go live, it's going to be an uphill battle in terms of adoption of your program if they're not engaged in the right way.
Well, and you're taking me back. I mean, I just taught the class, and you just taught the class too. You taught it online, and I taught it live. But one of the things that we talk about a lot is sponsorship.
Yep.
And I spend a lot of time talking about how are you going to help that sponsor, and I'm talking about EVP high up in the organization. On how, first off, they're tremendously busy.
Yep.
So they are not going to welcome you into their office to take away, to make their 8 o'clock or their 7:30 dinner and 8 o'clock dinner. So you've got to learn how to communicate with them. But not all you really want, but one of the things that I have always emphasized is, hey, every time you get a chance, ask these people about this. And you load their guns
Mm-hmm.
and you say, just ask them.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, those people say, oh, this is important to
Yeah.
my boss.
Yep.
And maybe I ought to get engaged a little bit. And then maybe I'll get a phone call as the change leader.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've been welcomed into the black hole instead of having to knock on the door.
But see, Jim, you just perfectly demonstrated what one of those interpersonal skills looks like, where it's important. That's, if I'm just going to paraphrase what I think I heard, is you jumped in there to help out the leader, not for your own purposes, but to help drive the organization forward by making the leader look good. That's something that's tough to teach, if you know what I mean.
And hey, they didn't hire me in this 12 years ago. They didn't hire me because I had great knowledge like you do and change or whatever. I just tell a lot of great stories. So, and
they're good.
Well, you go back to made to stick.
Yep.
In fact, I got to Karin, keep us under control.
Yes.
You're doing great. I was going to intervene real quick and just let people know that the Master of Science in Operations Management and Master of Science in Engineering Management that Travis and Jim have been kind of referencing throughout this presentation. We've got 2 master's degrees, we've got 4 graduate certificates, and then we've got our newly rolled out micro certificates. If you're interested in any of those or any of our professional programs, we've got a QR code there on the screen. Just simply scan that with your phone, and that'll take you to all of the programs that we offer in the College of Engineering and the Department of Industrial Engineering. And we just want to remind folks that our next podcast is going to be on January 17th. It's episode 4, talking about trends in leadership. And as we wrap up, I'm going to keep this screen up, but Jim, Travis, what I want to kind of wrap up for our listeners and those who are going to listen to this later on, what do you think the top maybe 2 or 3 takeaways of this talk that you guys had that you would like people to know about?
I'll start with one, and then Jim, you can go on the other. I'd say the first one is traits are important. You can't neglect the traits. If you are looking to staff a team, look at the traits. I don't want to say give them a priority, but in many cases you might have to. If your HR team does not have a hiring process, really do some research on the behavioral interview questions, and you need to determine what are those traits that are critical for you that you need your team to be effective, and go use the behavioral-based interview questions and drill those. That's one takeaway. Jim, what about you?
The one that I emphasize in pretty well all of my classes is your best technician or best supervisor is not generally the one that has got that skill set and that knowledge level, or the traits that will make them successful at the next level. So you're going to end up, and it's going to be a hard decision for that maintenance manager or whatever. Well, why are you picking Joe when I'm the best at what I do? And they need to have an answer. And oftentimes they don't want to have an answer, and they just end up getting a person in there that struggles.
Yep. And so the last thing I think both Jim and I agree on is when you're interviewing people or when you're staffing people, please look at the interpersonal skills and look at, the kind of people you want on your team. It'll make life a lot easier for you than if you hire someone for their functional skills, yet they don't have the interpersonal skills.
Oh my goodness. It's, they're just surly, mean people out there that nobody wants to work with. And now anyway,
do yourself a favor.
That's for sure.
We'll leave those thoughts with you.
Latest episodes are going to drop on Thursdays after the recording, so you can check us out on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and also our YouTube channel. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Jim.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Before you go, if you enjoyed today's conversations, would you mind leaving us a review on whatever podcast platform that you're listening on? Our goal is education and helping people improve their professional skills and knowledge to advance in their careers and positive reviews help others learn about our programs. Thanks, and we'll catch you on the next episode.